Hello everyone, Sirkex here, and today I'm going to be showing you how I painted my Bronze Age Necrons. Before we get into it, I do recommend that nobody actually attempt this paint scheme. While it isn't particularly difficult, it is very time consuming, and I do think you could probably get similar results with a much simpler process. This video is intended less as an instruction manual and more as documentation for my hobby project. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it. The first step is going to be using Stormhost Silver in order to paint all of the skeleton-y bits, the Under Armor sections, the joints, the hips, the section of tubing and stuff underneath the chest armor, just kind of everything that is below the surface. Make sure to really get in there, get the neck and head tubes painted up good. You don't have to worry about being super careful with this, since any overpaint is going to be covered up in the next steps. I have at least tried to order this paint scheme in such a way that you can be as reckless as possible, considering how many steps are involved in the process. You want to make sure you also get the fingers and the gun handle, as well as these front sections of the rifle here. Now I did forget to paint the gun barrel silver in this close-up here. I do eventually catch it and do get it fixed. The next step is to go ahead and slather Nuln Oil over all of those same sections. If you keep a somewhat dry brush off to the side, you can wick away any places where it seems to be pulling too much, but I'm intending to use the Nuln Oil not just for shading recesses, but also as a method of adding weathering and oxidation to the silver parts. Having it just sort of darken everything and make everything look dirtier is the intent, so you don't need to be super focused on doing like a pin wash or anything. Next is Auric Armor Gold, followed by Rakeland Flesh Shade. The gold is being used just for the chest emblem there. And if you could actually see what I was doing, you might be able to understand that. You just go ahead, paint that little section gold, and then hit it with a dab of the Flesh Shade. It doesn't seem like a lot of gold, but that's mostly because I wanted the emblem to sort of pop out by itself, and also because I am intending to add more gold accents to higher tiered units. For example, this Plasmancer, which has quite a bit more gold trim on it. The next step is Army Painter True Copper, which you go ahead and do over all of the, I guess, fleshy bits is the best term for it. All of the armor panels, back, chest, head, pretty much everywhere that hasn't already been painted yet. Just give it a quick once over. do ignore the silver prongs of the gun here. I made a mistake when I was painting it, and they are not supposed to be silver. I will be going over them again with the copper. I'm not the biggest fan of this particular paint. It doesn't give me quite the coverage that I would like, and I end up basically always having to do at least 2 coats to get the coverage that I want. But it is the only paint that I could find that is in the kind of exact right copper color that I was looking for. I went through 3 or 4 others before I settled on this one, just because it is what I want as far as the look to be. And here you see I'm repainting over the prongs of the rifle. I have heard that more recent Army Painter products are of a much higher quality, but I haven't had the chance to use any of them. Next up, like before, is Agrax Earthshade. Just go ahead and go over all of the copper areas with it. You can be pretty liberal, again, just like with Nuln Oil on the silver part, so I'm using it as an oxidizer, as a weathering medium, as much as for shading. So having it pull up in weird places just sort of adds to the look that these are dirty, weathered creatures that have maybe been buried in the sand for a few millennia. The next step is going to be touch-ups and highlights. We're going to be highlighting the silver using just pure white. And we'll be highlighting the bronze areas with Army Painter Weapons Bronze. We can also use those base colors to bring back the midtones in any areas that have gotten too dark. But before we do any of that, I'm going to be starting with black and just going in and touching up the insides of those ribs, making the chest cavity look dark. If you do this fast enough and you come in with a wet brush, you can actually wipe away most of the overpaint from this. But I usually end up going back over that section with just the copper anyway to add highlights, just a little bit to the top of the armor. You just go ahead and add silver highlights to more of the raised areas. I'm not looking to completely bring back the color that's been dimmed down by the wash as much as I am trying to add some level of highlighting or light values. So I'm mostly focusing on just the top surfaces of stuff, brightening them up a little bit. If you're doing anything round, try and do it a little bit curved to add sort of that dimension back into it, or exaggerate that dimension to it. Make sure you get all the ridges on the spine. Get the tops of the hips. And this is also a good chance to go back and fix any overpaint that you may have. In my experience, that ends up being the areas that I want highlighted for the most part anyway. Now you see I'm doing the same process, but this time with the true copper color. While I'm doing that, I think this might be an excellent time for this video's incorrect fact that I say in order to drive engagement. And today's incorrect fact is that the only reason why Egyptian mummies are so rare these days is because people ate them. Yeah, people ended up being convinced that mummies were a cure-all solution and decided to resort to cannibalism as a medical practice. They used to be quite common. It was a very common practice in ancient Egypt where basically anybody of means would be mummified. And as a result, we had tons of mummies. And that's the reason why we no longer have very many mummies now, is almost all of them were destroyed. Here I am trying to pay special attention to the face, bring up the highlights a little bit more, since it is something of a focal point on the model. But I do think that the later glow effects are more important. Once we've got everything highlighted, we'll go ahead and do our edge highlighting in white for the silver bits and using weapons bronze for the rest of it. Just go ahead and pick out a few spots. I'm not the best at necessarily identifying where I want this. I tend to mostly focus it towards, again, the tops of stuff, just the very edges of things, just to bring in a little bit of extra contrast. Getting the fingers done, I find, is really important since it makes them a lot more readable from a distance. From a close-up, it might look quite dramatic having the white paint there, but from a distance, I think that sort of blends together and looks much nicer. I do have to apologize about the rest of the close-up shots for the video. I filmed these originally all at once, and halfway through, my camera decided to change its ISO settings, and now the rest of them are going to be overexposed and look, frankly, just terrible. I will, at the end, include some much nicer close-up footage of everything. Next step is use Cyberite Green to create the copper oxide layer. You could do this with a small sponge, but I have a old manky brush that I like to use for this. Just dab it on kind of randomly over the copper parts. When I do this, I usually will do varying amounts of the patina depending on just my mood at the moment. So some models have a little bit, some have a lot, some don't have any at all. Just trying to give something of a variation across the entire army. Next is Army Painter Green Skin plus white, where we're going to be painting up the green tube on the bottom of the weapons here. Start by just doing a base coating of the green skin, and then slowly start adding white into the mixture and highlighting the different corrugations on the pipe, kind of aiming for the tops of it. And then once that's done, doing a final highlight in pure white. I will usually do the base coat and then 2 steps of highlighting before I do the pure white. Next step is Vallejo Blue-Green, which we are going to stipple onto the back armor piece, as well as the handle and middle sections of the gun. We're not looking for complete coverage here, we're looking to create a paint chipping sort of effect. You can, once the paint is about 70% dried, come back in with a toothpick and start scratching it a little bit to add kind of a more textured appearance to the paint coming off. I do think, having done quite a few models both with the scratching and without it, that I prefer the look without the scratching, so you can probably just skip this step. The final step is the glow effects, which are made using Vallejo Royal Purple, white paint, just a drop of Liquitex matte medium, and just some pure white. I start by mixing just a little bit of matte medium into my paint mixture, and then basing with the Royal Purple. I'm not particularly concerned with overpaint at this point, since it's going to end up just helping sell the glow effect. It's going to look a little bit like source lighting. And I am trying to get just a little bit around all of kind of the edges around the balls on the weapon. For the eyes, I do the same thing. Just go ahead and put in a quick layer of everything, both on the eye itself and around the socket. And then go ahead and add a little bit of white to it to lighten it up, and then go ahead and glaze a line down the center of the pipe, and then highlight the fins of the weapon, and then the tops of the orbs on the weapon. We're just trying to add paint in all of the same kind of places we did before, but just a lesser amount of it. And then we go ahead and go in with a second blend, adding a little bit more whites to it. Same process, just painting a little bit less than we did before. We want to try and angle it to only hit the tops of the balls on the weapon to just kind of highlight more towards the top of the model. And then finally you come in with just a little teeny bit of white over everything. Even less than what I'm doing here. You just want the highest raised parts. I think this is the step that really does begin to sell the effect. That little tiny splash of white brings the whole glow thing together. And then just a tiny dot of white on the center of the eyes there. And then finally, I'll go in with Druhi Violet and just hit all of the low points here. Starting coming in from the unders parts of the eye to highlight around the eye sockets, coming in on the fins of the weapon and hitting right in between them, as well as doing the low points on the balls section of the barrel. Now, a big part of the reason why I did end up choosing to do such a complicated paint scheme for this army is largely to force myself to practice a bunch of techniques. I painted 20 Necron warriors like this, and I really just hammered down on the fundamentals of how do I do my highlighting, how do I do the glow effect, how do I, make this all look good. And kind of as a direct result of that, I was progressing over the course of doing the whole army. And as you can see here, a comparison between one of the first models that I painted and one of the last models I painted. There's quite a big difference in my abilities over the course of the two. So if you do decide to do this, do know that is half the point of this paint scheme, is to sort of force myself to learn certain fundamental skills. Well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. The standard YouTube pleasantries wouldn't go amiss. And remember, we all have our own hobby journey, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on mine.